Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome back to another episode of the Word Docs. I'm Sean. I'm here with Alex.
Yay!
And Amy.
Hi.
And our special guest for this episode, Garth Nix.
Hello!
Now, Garth Nix is quite a well-known author.
Yay!
In certain circles, I think, Sean.
Infamous, one might say. He's the author of many, many excellent fantasy novels and other books like what were they called? The books about the babies.
Those famous books.
Some books that Sean can't remember. Yes, those too. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. A very diverse author, excellent short story writer, a person that I've collaborated with and spent far too many days hanging around airports with.
It's worth pointing out we actually were going to fly somewhere. We weren't just hanging around at airports.
I like to imagine that you were just plane spotting together for an afternoon.
We worked as baggage handlers together for some time.
We did do an episode just recently about the crappy jobs we had before we were writers, and I know you've had a few too, Garth.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks very much for coming on the show. We've got a list of questions that we like to grill our interviewees with, and they're very curly and complicated. I did tell you earlier that this would be a cushy interview, but
You did. You lied.
now we've gulled you
Okay.
to being here.
And you're here now, and we've introduced you. It's too late.
I've done the clap. What can I
You've
do?
done the clap,
Yeah,
you're in.
stuck.
So to speak. That sounds slightly wrong, but anyway, let's continue.
Who would like to start the grilling of Garth?
Ooh.
I can't read my own handwriting, Sean.
I can't remember the questions.
It's the first question. I don't know about the order of this, but it seems to be the first question we were going to ask is, where do you write? That seems like a strange first question, but let's start there anyway. So is it an airport? What's your writing routine?
Well, you know those little trucks that drag those trailers around the airport? I like to perch on the front of the engine of one while it's still warm.
Gets you through the winter.
Well, I've written in many different places, and currently, and for quite a long time, I've been lucky enough to have a separate office. And actually, you can see it behind me in this call. Not those listening. I'll now describe it to you. No, I have a separate office.
We can hear the echo.
I hope you can't hear an echo because it's such an enormous office. Yes, in my great hall, I sit upon a throne writing. I've been lucky enough to have a separate office, which is about 10 minutes walk from home. And I had a different one before this. So the last 15 years or so, I've been very fortunate to have separate offices, but I also write at home as well. And I just have at various times I've had a spare room. The last quite a long time, I have part of a lounge room. We have a long table that has several computers on it, one of which is mine. And I work there often late at night. So it's always mixed up like that. But I do write sometimes by hand. I used to write entirely by hand to start with. I'd write a chapter longhand, then I'd type it up when I had the opportunity in black and red notebooks by preference. So sometimes I will still do that. I'll take a old-fashioned paper notebook and I will go somewhere out the park or by the beach and I'll do some writing, but not that much.
I'd be too paranoid. Like a notebook on the beach is just, what's that scene from Love Actually where Colin Firth ends up in the dam?
Yeah, pursuing the pages.
Pursuing the seagull that's ripped it out of your hands.
See, a bound notebook is fairly safe. I mean, I think that's not going to go flying away.
It says a lot
anywhere.
about Alex that it might, I think.
Yeah. Somehow I would find a way.
Well, you were discussing Sean's hand clapping abilities. Perhaps he would be able to lose a bound notebook by the beach. But that's something I've always done. But I did a lot more of it earlier on. So yeah, mostly it's my office or my home, and so not terribly exciting in terms of authors.
It seems pretty exciting to have an office though. So with your daily routine, do you keep in like 9 to 5, 5-day a week thing with the office, or is it looser than that?
It's looser, but I do try and maintain a routine of sort of wandering up here at some point in the morning. probably between 9 and 10 quite often. And the mornings I mostly do admin. I mean, once you've been doing this for a long time, it is a small business, and the small business has lots of things that you have to do. So generally I do emails, and I do all the sort of rigmarole of administration is the first thing I do. And that varies enormously, of course. Sometimes I might spend a whole day doing that, but often it's just a few hours.
Yeah, a day can go very easily that way.
Yes, it can. And then, and the marketing stuff you do, can you answer these 15 questions for this website, which always takes far, far longer than merely talking about it. Those written response ones always fill me with dread because they're just going to take so long.
My favourite written response by you, Garth, that I was a part of was when we were in a bar in LA. We had just arrived to do a book tour. We were both jet-lagged out of our mind and had drunk a lot of pink drinks at this point. And you noticed that an interview request had come in, and the interviewer asked us, what rituals do we perform in order to write? And you went, I'll answer this now. Sean likes to run around the house naked 3 times.
Did I actually say that?
It's somewhere
out there in the
world.
When someone asks a question like, what rituals do you perform? I mean, you're just asking for trouble.
It is. It's a gimme, isn't it? It is. It's a baiting question.
Particularly a fantasy writer. I mean, it's not going to work, is it? What rituals?
I love that the fantasy is Sean walking around the house naked, because that's,
Well, curiously, I'm pretty sure that's not one of my answers. I think Sean just came up with that then.
I think I added naked.
On a dragon.
And really, he was just describing what Sean was currently doing at the hotel. So,
Well, I think that was for spirit animals, wasn't it? And so we were in a very large hotel in San Francisco. So he would have gotten into a lot of trouble, I think, if he'd been running around naked in this enormous bar. Though Sean did almost get us into trouble a bit later. We were in Utah, and he wanted to talk about witchcraft in front of all these Mormon school children, and had to be dissuaded. Had to be reminded that perhaps this wasn't the best idea.
Know your room.
You've actually been initiated into a coven, haven't you?
That's right. The question was,
aren't you an actual witch?
Do you know what your spirit animal is? And I was going to say, well, yes, I do know what mine is, because as part of the witchcraft training I did, we were introduced to our spirit animal during a mind-altering trance. And our publicist and Garth looked at me like I was insane.
I've never seen a publicist pale quite
It's
so
brilliant,
quickly.
because he would have said it really cheerfully as well.
Yeah, he did. He was like, yeah, this is fantastic.
Isn't this interesting?
Yeah. It is interesting, and just considering where we were about to go on is perhaps not the best idea, but...
Jet lag makes you say mad things. So
it all works.
There's something about knowing your audience and all of that. The related question to where do you write is, what is your...
Or sharing too much.
Exactly. What is your reward? Do you have a reward? Because we know that Sean's a chocoholic, and I'm sure you're aware of that. I have confessed to being an alcoholic, I think, without meaning to. Do you have a reward system going on? If you manage to write, I don't know, a set amount of words, do you buy yourself a pony or something?
I think I have a continuous reward system going, whether I've done anything to deserve it or not, to be honest. I'm nowhere near as chocoholic as Sean is. In fact, I don't really like chocolate, except I do like dark chocolate Hagues. So I do make a exception for that. I am rather fond of alcohol, I have to confess. So certainly I do like a drink from time to time. I don't think I have a reward system as such. I think I'm entirely spoilt because I have most of the things that I want most of the time, regardless of whether I've done anything to deserve it or not. I mean, I guess the most likely thing when I've been working very hard on something where I've been doing a lot of writing under a great deal of momentum and, been really writing for hours and hours and hours on end for a long time is the greatest driver is finishing it, not any thought of reward. It's just wanting to get it done. And not because I just want it done, but because... I mean, I'm sure you all know towards the end of writing a book or writing something very long, the momentum you hope, if it's going well, the momentum is there, and you want to be carried on that wave through to the end.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest driver, rather than any sort of, when I finish this, I can do that, because I do all the things that reward myself throughout. So. Yeah, maybe I should start being more parsimonious with the rewarding and hold off until I can say, okay, I can't have that drink until till I've written 2 more chapters. Yeah.
If you'd asked us this question 20 years ago, our answer might have been, well, at the end of a hard day at Sydney Writers' Festival, we like to retire to Garth's flat and drink lots of alcohol, smoke cigars, and watch old episodes of The Goodies. That was...
the Goodies. Oh.
Well, if you ask my wife Anna, she'd say it's mostly what we did in around that time.
That's right.
Well, I mean, I guess that's a reward. That's a very occasional kind of reward because you don't see each other that often.
That's right.
I mean, most of my writer friends spread all around the world, and so you only catch up at a convention or a writers' festival or something like that. And so it is a big reward to be able to get together and have a drink and watch an old episode of The Goodies or an old film or whatever, and just enjoy that company. Yes, it's The Goodies.
I'm not over it.
Tim Brooke
I'm
Taylor.
not over it. Nah.
I'm not over it at all. Vale Tim Brooke Taylor.
I'm sure
It's
you've
very
seen it,
sad.
but I was watching him do the Morrissey song. Well, I can't remember what the song's called, but it's a very dark, tortured song about Morrissey's wife being in a coma. And then Tim Brooke Taylor does the most cheerful, upbeat, chirpy version of it. It's
Of course he
great.
does.
It's well worth looking up. It's brilliant. It's fantastic.
I will have to look that up. He was always so cheerful in his screen persona. Anyway, and I believe actually in life from what the tributes that
Seems
were
to
paid
be the
him.
case, definitely, yeah. It was quite original, even within that group, I think. The next question we had, and jump in, guys, if you want, the next question I have on my list is, why do you do this? Which probably should have been my first question.
Do you mean this podcast?
I was
or
just going
writing
to say, yeah, why am I doing this podcast? Because Sean made me do it. Why write? It's a good question, and I think it's a difficult one to answer because I don't really know why I do it, except if I didn't, I would be unhappy. I get very grumpy if I'm not writing, if I'm not doing anything, getting something. I mean, it may not necessarily be getting prose down. It might be making notes. It might be just lying in a hammock thinking through a story. But if I'm not doing those things, I get quite cross.
Yeah,
with the world,
I think we can all relate. I've said that previously on this podcast. I get weird. Do you think it's a compulsion in that sense then?
Yeah, it's kind of an inner demon, I suppose. It's certainly made much easier if people want to read the stuff and publish it and so on, because that enables you to keep doing it more easily. So I guess it is a compulsion, and I think that's what makes it very hard for those people where their circumstances of their life mean they can't write. It's physically, economically, socially, whatever, not possible. That's a very, very difficult thing. And certainly the easier, if the writing economically works and that lets you reinforce the ability to do the writing, that makes life much easier. I think I would still write even if no one wanted to publish it, or I self-published it and no one wanted to read it, and thus I had to spend much more time doing other things. I would still write, but I would probably miss the opportunity to write as much as I do.
So at what point in your career were you able to write full-time, and what kind of jobs you juggled until that point?
I had 2 occasions where I could write full-time. I was working. I mean, I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 19 years old, and I was travelling in the United Kingdom, and I was rereading a lot of my old favourite, mostly children's books, not entirely in the places where they were set. And I realised that I wanted to try and write stories myself, and I in fact wrote a story in that time, which I sold. It was the first story that I sold quite a bit later. I also wrote half a novel. I hadn't learned the importance of actually finishing things at that stage. It wasn't a very good novel, or half a novel, but it wasn't completely terrible either. I think if I had finished it, I possibly could have got it published and I would have got started even younger, though I still got started reasonably young. So I thought, I want to be a writer. But I was also very interested in writers' lives and in publishing. And so I read biographies of writers and I read about publishing. And so I learned quite early on that it's very hard to make a living, even before I tried myself. And so I thought, okay, I'll have to do something else just to pay the rent and so on, while also writing. And I can get a better day job if I go back to university and, get my degree. So I did that with the aim of getting jobs to do with books, whilst also being a writer. And so I became a bookseller, and then I worked in publishing, and I was an editorial assistant. I worked my way up to being a senior editor with HarperCollins. I was writing all that time. I did some other publishing jobs too. So I had my first book published, The Rag Witch, while I was an editor at HarperCollins. Published by Pat McMillan, totally unrelated. Interestingly, even now, people say, it must have been easy for you to get your book published because you're working in publishing. But actually, when I sold the book, I was working for an academic think tank, and I had no connections whatsoever in trade publishing. I didn't know anybody. I had nothing. I just did the traditional thing of doing the research, who published the kind of things that I'd written. I found out who to send it to. I sent it to, I think, 7 publishers. 3 of them never replied at all. 2 said no, and 1 wanted to publish it, and 1 wanted to publish it, but so late that it was too late. I'd already done a deal with the other publisher. Very normal story. But then I went travelling again, and when I came back, I thought, I'm tired of being poor because publishing's badly paid. My first book hadn't really made any money. It had actually done quite well. It was well reviewed. It sold. It was reprinted, but it's still. I was tired of just being poor. And so I thought, what else can I do? And I was looking around, and to cut a long story short, I ended up working in public relations, writing stuff mainly for tech companies, but also managing marketing and PR. And that was immensely better paid, but, it had other problems. And I ended up with my own company with 2 partners doing that. But in that period, I'd written Sabriel, and it came out in 1995, and it did pretty well in Australia. But then in 96, it came out in America, and I did a deal with my US publisher, which enabled me to go full time. So it was enough money to have like a couple of years of writing. And I thought, this is what I've always wanted. I've always wanted to be a full-time writer. I'm tired of the PR business and just being at the beck and call of my clients 24/7. Even though it was very lucrative, I felt it was kind of soul-destroying. So in 1998 was my first year of full-time writing. And I've been building up to this, working incredibly hard in the PR business, also writing a novel. And when 1998 rolled around, economically, I could be a full-time writer. Psychologically, I was totally unprepared because I went from being super, super busy to thinking, it's fine, I'll just do it tomorrow. I'm a full-time writer now. So I wrote less.
I've got all this time in the world.
That's interesting because I think that's what our PhD students find. I think when they get a scholarship and they have 3 years, they have 2 years where they're just like in limbo, finding it hard to get motivated to write.
Yeah, I mean,
it's interesting.
I just hadn't thought about how it would work, and I'd not set up the structures to do it. So I had a year of being a full-time writer in 1998. Where I wrote less than any other year ever, I think. And then I sort of panicked. I sort of panicked towards the end. I thought, wow, I've got to get structure back into my life. How do I do it? And I had the opportunity I'd been involved in helping Curtis Brown Australia by the Hickson Agency, just as a friendly helping out some of the aspects of that. And Fiona Inglis said to me, well, do you want to come and work part-time as an agent with us? And I thought, that would give me structure, and I'd work 3 days a week and I'd write around it. And it did. And quite soon I'd got back to working very hard in both jobs. But I needed that spine of other work to be able to work around it.
Isn't that interesting? It's like you needed to not be able to write to be able to write, if that makes sense.
I had not learned that I had to really think about the structures of my life and how everything went together. And I certainly learned. I didn't learn during 1998, but by the end of it, I'd learned that it was
It's a
necessary.
bit like keeping romance in a marriage, isn't it?
You have to work. Well, you have to work. All good things you have to work at. All good things.
Speaking of romance, 1998 was, of course, the year you met me, Garth.
And the grand romance began.
I don't think of that as a romance, Sean. But
romance.
Gosh, has it been that long? I would have thought I would have got some time off for good behaviour or something like that. But,
I love the pause after that. Our romance. Well, Sean.
Sorry to disappoint you, Sean.
Yeah. Well, bromance. Why not?
Can I ask how you two met and how you ended up collaborating together?
Sure. Well, we met at the Brisbane Writers' Festival. We actually knew of each other because the Australian science fiction fantasy scene is small. I'd read some of Sean's work.
I was on a judging panel that gave Sabriel an Aurealis Award.
He ran around the hotel naked. That's hard to forget.
Well, he was well known as running naked around hotels. That's why I was a little wary of him at first. We met at the Brisbane Writers Festival. We were on a panel together, and we've told this story before because we had quite a bonding moment because there was a completely crazy person in the audience. And it was momentarily quite potentially going to be a terrible situation because this guy who had a kit bag, it clanked and sounded like it was full of weapons, just stood up and started ranting about how UFOs had kidnapped him and done terrible things to him.
Wow.
And it was our fault as science fiction writers for not warning him. And so there was this horrible hush amongst everybody as everyone realised that this guy is actually completely crazy and he appears to have a bag full of weapons. But it didn't go on for very long. It was about 10 seconds of him ranting, building up steam, and then he just stopped and left. And everyone was like...
No, he'd said his bit.
He didn't even say his piece. He just started this rant and then just stopped and left.
Wow.
And saying your piece doesn't usually stop a crazy person.
No, that's true.
No.
I don't understand why he was blaming the sci-fi writers for not warming it, because I would think you'd blame the romance writers.
I know. They don't say anything about the alien invasion.
It depends upon your view of anal probing, I suppose, whether you consider it a romance or not. But,
was it consensual? Then it's romance.
Well... he didn't actually go into those details.
This is getting maybe towards horror.
And I think possibly the audience were particularly perturbed because he didn't begin with the traditional introduction of "this isn't exactly a question."
Yes.
But say we went and had quite a number of drinks afterwards to celebrate the fact we were still alive, and we've been friends ever since.
That's right, and all those years of hanging out together at conventions and bars and each other's living rooms, we just talked about stories and then talked about the possibility of collaborating, and then you came up with a title and a scenario for our first novel collaboration, Trouble Twisters.
Yeah, we talked about writing all kinds of things, and we'd sort of dabbled, getting a few ideas down for quite a number of different stories. In different formats too. We've discussed a couple of, feature film screenplays, all kinds of stuff. And then we just settled on, I had Trouble Twisters, the title, and I had a very vague idea. And we started talking about it and in that conversation expanded it and thought, oh, yeah, we'd like to write this. And, got swept up in the enthusiasm for it and carried on.
How does the process work with collaborating? How do you co-write a book?
Well, I'm sure, there's so many different ways to co-write. I don't know, have you co-written things yourself or?
I haven't. Have you, Alex? In theatre, you might have.
Well, I'm looking at Sean.
Alex and I are in the very early stages of working on a novel together.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
which is great. It involves eating a lot of chocolate.
It involves a lot of chocolate and all of my paranoias just pouring out. So I look at you two actually and think it's wonderful that I think my fear with it is and it's completely unfounded and I understand that, but my fear is that you're going to lose a friend if something goes wrong.
I'd say that's actually quite a proper fear. And no, I'm only joking. No, I think that.
Well, it can be. We both know people who have had collaborations go horribly wrong and ruin friendships, which is why you've got to be very careful about who you choose to collaborate with and how.
Yes, I think that being actually aware that that's a possibility, I think already puts you a step ahead of those people who perhaps go into it more starry-eyed. So I think actually...
Maybe also, do you think it helps that you're both established?
Yes.
And you both had a name and a reputation, and if you come in with a power difference, it might be very different maybe.
One of the things that makes it helpful is that it's easy if it's not your main gig. So if it's something you're doing in parallel to your other work because you want to and it's fun, not because you think something's going to come, something great's going to come of it. It's just something you really want to do and it's going to be enjoyable. I think that tends to work out a lot better than let's get together and create this mega thing that's bigger than anything. Or the other side of it is when people get together because they think the other person is going to overcome their weaknesses. So it's like, I'm no good at dialogue, you can do that sort of thing. That doesn't work either because you have to be basically both good at everything. You can't have someone having to fix up everything or do a very key part of the writing. But everyone does it in different ways. And the way that Sean and I worked out was we talked about the story at great length, and we worked it out in quite a lot of detail, and then together would work out a chapter outline in considerable detail. And I've always done chapter outlines, but I don't follow them as for my own books. But for the ones that we've written together, you do need to follow them much more carefully. And then for most of the books, I would then write the first chapter, sort of set the tone and the characters and so on. But this is after a lot of talking about it and working through it. There's a lot of character detail already in the outline. And then Sean would go away and write the rest of the first draft because he writes swiftly and well, and it does happen much quicker than if I was doing it. And then he'd send it back to me. And there's a bit of to and fro in that process as well. And some necessary departure from the outlines. And then he'd send it back to me, and then I'd go through and I'd rewrite. And then it'd go back to Sean and so on, and we'd kick backwards and forwards. And by the time, I guess it'd be rewritten 4 or 5 times, perhaps more. By the time it's finished, neither of us could tell who wrote which bit in terms of the prose. You couldn't point to a paragraph and say, I did that. In fact, we've complimented each other on parts of the books, which thinking the other person's written it, and we still don't know who did, because it's like, I love that thing you did with Odo, and I'll be like, no, I didn't write that. And Sean will be like, well, I didn't write it either.
I thought
so
you
who the hell did write it?
Alex the Spider.
Alex the Spider, yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
But we actually one of the books we did together, we reversed that process for...
Blood Ties.
I was trying to remember what the Spirit Animals, which book it was. Spirit Animals, Blood Ties, where, in fact, I wrote the first draft as quickly as I could, and then Sean rewrote it because of the way that the various deadlines were working. And again, you still can't tell. So, which I think is a sign of a good collaboration. And that's basically the process. But I know people who do alternate chapters. Sometimes people even do, alternate characters. There's all kinds of. It's like writing a book at all. There's so many different ways to do it.
In a future episode, you'll hear my side of the story.
He was a monster!
Let's hear it now, Sean.
No, we're almost out of time, and I'd like to ask...
Let's hear it now, Sean.
One last question. Garth is using his evil voice. Well, I was going to... Seeing as we're coming to the end of the podcast, and seeing as I've remembered the names of your earliest books, the very clever baby books...
You mean you looked it up?
Books.
You Googled it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I googled
His
it.
phone.
What would you like to be remembered for, Garth? Would it be Very Clever Baby's Guide to the Greenhouse Effect? Would it be The Keys to the Kingdom, Sabriel, our collaborations, of course?
Or all of the above. I mean, the thing is, I never even think about that, because there's no point thinking about it. Maybe you'll be remembered, maybe you won't. Who knows? It's impossible to tell. Certainly, my most well-known book is Sabriel, around the world, and it's 25 years old this year, actually, but America next year. So it stood the test of time. A lot of books don't, and I'm very grateful that it has, and it's still going strong. But, in 10 years, maybe it'll disappear. I talked about being interested in authors' biographies and in publishing and so on from quite an early age, and I've continued that interest. And one of the things that you learn from reading about authors and reading about publishing and how everything works is that books that were enormous and were huge and were everywhere can be totally forgotten 10 years later or 20 years later or 6 months later. So you have no control over it. So I actually never think in those terms, to be honest. Yeah, I guess I write to the best of my ability. I tell the stories that I want to tell, and I keep my fingers crossed. I hope that they connect with people, but whether they'll continue to connect with people, whether they'll still be around, who knows? So
might depend on whether that Sabriel movie ever happens. We'll have fingers crossed.
Absolutely. But again, books get turned into movies. Movies can be great, and they still both disappear. I mean, more often the movies are terrible and doesn't do anything for either of them. But there's an enormous element of luck in writers' careers, and you can't control that. All you can do is write what you can, and try and team up with good people, good agent, good publishers. Try and work with the best people. Do the best you can. Do the sort of sensible marketing stuff, particularly the things that you're able to do. And all of these things, they change the probability of things working in sort of commercial or critical terms a little bit, but you can't make things happen. You can maybe change the probability by 0.001%. So it's still worth doing because maybe that'll be the difference. Yes. But that's all it is. So I'm not exactly fatalistic about it because a true fatalist wouldn't do a damn thing. They'd just sit back and
let the chaos unfold. Yes.
There's my novel. I will place it on the footpath and whatever happens, happens.
I will throw it to the masses from my tower.
To the seagulls.
On the beach.
If it is truly great, it will be taken from the recycling by a down-on-his-luck publisher working as a garbage collector. And everything will happen. No, I'm not quite at that level. But so I think it's important to do all the things that there is a whole industry around authors being online and authors using social media and all that stuff. And yes, they are all sort of very small probability changes, and so they're worth doing, but you still can't make things happen. I'm not sure. I hope I'm making sense there.
You're making absolute sense.
You are. You're actually being a very good stoic too there, Garth, philosophically.
Do you think, what I'm picking up on from a few things you've said, that one of the ways to stay sane as an author is to have a few irons in the fire at the same time? I mean, you said when you're collaborating that you don't want that to be your only gig.
Yeah, I think it is important in terms of staying sane to have a number of things going on. And I think it's important from a strictly common sense point of view as well. Particularly first-time authors, you often talk to them and they've written their novel and they've sent it out and they're just waiting for something to happen. And that is absolutely deadly because there's nothing else to think about except, is someone reading it? Is something going to happen? And there's so many things that may or may not happen that it eats you up. Whereas if you've already started the next book or you're writing a story or at least you're being a writer, then your mind is engaged in that, not in wondering what's going to happen or not. And often, because these things are slow, and this includes even if you're self-publishing and if you're looking at how many copies you've sold every day, that's going to eat you up as well. Whereas if you're working on something, that's productive. It gives you another spin of the wheel down the track. And also, it will hopefully absorb you. And so you'll forget about that other stuff. You'll actually have forgotten what's going on. And that's a much, much more comfortable position and psychically much better, I think, for you than to get too all in on wishing and hoping. Wishing and hoping is good. I mean, it's good to have that in the back of your mind, I think, because you never know, and it's good to be optimistic. But the more work you do, the more chances you have, and it gets the sort of the balance right, I think. That's my 2 cents worth anyway.
Well, it's good advice. Good advice for writers at all stages in their careers. Unfortunately, we're quite out of time. Thank you very much, Garth.
Thank you.
For coming in to have a chat with us, metaphorically coming in.
Well.
I mean, you're in Sydney, we're in Adelaide, in our separate homes.
Well, it's very nice. It's very nice to see you. See your separate homes.
Good to see you too, Garth.
Yeah.
All the best. Maybe we'll have you back on the show another time if you'll ever come back.
I'll be very happy to, of course. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah,
Garth.
you too.
Happy writing.
Take care, all of you.
Happy writing.
Happy writing, all of you.
Happy writing.
Take care.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Happy writing. Happy writing. Happy writing.
It haunts my dreams.
I'm sorry, hasn't Sean developed a song for it? Happy writing.
I'm sure he will.
Happy writing.
Don't tempt me.
No, please.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.